My name is Marcus Windle, and this is my oral presentation for the Positions and Practice module, Falmouth MA Photography. I will be looking at my past and present practice, as well as outlining ideas for my research project. My love of the land comes from my grandfather, a second generation gardener, and if not in actuality, at least in spirit, a smallholder. My childhood was filled with working on the allotment, fishing and several outdoor pursuits, experiences that bonded me to the land. Coalbrookdale sparked my interest in the structures built by man and their relationship to the land. I first visited as part of a college project on the Industrial Revolution. This painting shows Coalbrookdale in its heyday. I was fascinated by the old blast furnaces and the remains of industrial processes. Looking at what I saw then and comparing it to paintings of the time, it is almost impossible to equate one with the other. The land has reintegrated man's industry back into itself. I made this photograph of Coalbrookdale Ironworks when I returned in 1989. It was my first serious attempt using Ansel Adams' zone system. The photo reflects what was in my mind's eye looking over the ironworks. My reading at the time centred around Ansel Adams and his zone system. I read various books on the subject, including the camera, the negative and the print. This body of work gave me my grounding in the mechanics of photography and gave me the tools that allowed me to record the vision in my mind's eye. Another influence at the time was Faye Godwin. I found her book Land to be inspirational. Her lovely use of light and tone and the details brought out by side lighting, showing every fold in the landscape. Faye Godwin showed the land as a working landscape, not as a country park. A photograph of Benton Lane Waterworks, a place I return to often. Looking back at the images I made, my focus was industrial and landscape. My choice of subject was not a conscious decision, but driven by my instincts. The mantra exposed for the shadows and developed for the highlights eventually led to me building my own darkroom, giving me control over the whole process, camera, negative and print. I believe my need to complete that cycle was inspired by my father, whose interest in motion pictures and filmmaking saw him write scripts, set build and produce to bring to life his cinematic visions. My passion for photography has for the most part been about the land in all its forms and man's relationship to it. I have found over the years that I have been drawn back to certain places not knowing why. It has taken some time to figure out that familiarity gives a sense of place and belonging. It acts as a gravitational sink. You are drawn to keep returning, each time developing a more in-depth understanding of place. My current practice spans the last 18 months, and it has expanded to include not only man acting as an agent of change, but also other forms of natural force. I use low-key, high-contrast monochrome images to show the imposing nature of the land. I try and depict the history of the landscape, how it has been shaped primarily by man, but also by forces throughout history. Jackie Bowring mentions Paul Grange in Melancholy and the Landscape. Paul Grange suggests that monochrome has a capacity to arrest, to stimulate slowness in a climate of speed. My thoughts are, monochrome removes the familiarity of colour, forcing the viewer to read the image using tone and shape, slowing and deepening the engagement. I have been told this image is striking, monumental and imposing, qualities that pull the viewer's attention. The details in the foreground, the light and shade on the hills, and the bracken holding the viewer's interest, punctum and studium. The image's overall exposure has been reduced to increase the drama, and critical areas lightened to lead the eye through the image from foreground to tore in the distance, pulling the viewer into the picture, conveying my feeling of awe and stillness. I have tried to use gestalt, figure and ground in this image, the windswept tree being the figure and a vast sky and scree scattered slope the ground. The topography is undulating, but the use of an extreme wide-angle lens has flattened and simplified the terrain and vignetted the sky, giving a sense of high altitude, conveying the essence of exposure to the elements. My influencers have grown to include other practitioners. Vincent Versace and Jeff Shue both played a large part in the development of digital photography post-processing. I admire their exacting approach to the process and their creative problem solving. I have also been looking at other practitioners working in the same area of interest. I like the way Crystal Abbas uses images taken over time to show changes to the land. Sontag writes, understanding is based on how something functions, and functioning takes place in time and must be explained in time. Only that which narrates can make us understand. I also like Abbas's use of subdued tones, primarily the cooler hues, and the use of panoramic crop. It gives her images a sense of remoteness. I also enjoyed T.J. Cooper's work. His use of long exposures and low light to blur movement and the lack of horizon gives an abstract feeling to his work, a dreamlike quality, meditative, drawing you into the frame. I continue to explore the theme of natural forces acting on the land, including the actions of men. Often the oldest evidence of man's past occupancy will be boundaries. These can take many forms: stone walls, boundary stones, ditches and hedgerows. Boundaries will be the focus of my research project. The initial phase of the project will consider hedgerows. Managed by man over the centuries, they are living records, some hedgerows dating back to the Bronze Age. I will be looking at their composition and exploring the layers and parts that make up a Devon hedge, photographing individual species in situ and showing them as part of the whole. In the following 3 images taken from my project, I have made use of depth of field to highlight the points of interest. In photos 1 and 2, light focus tones against a blurred dark background pull the eye into the picture. The third image has a different dynamic. The point of focus is dark and central against a light blurred background, adding tension as the eye wants to move to the light tone which has visual mass, but is drawn back to the hawthorn that has focus. Each hedgerow is a unique blend of species, so I have decided to concentrate on a section of hedgerow on Haverley Moor, a place I know well. I decided to experiment with alternative printing as part of the project. Looking at the sienna types produced by Anna Atkins and Jem Toes Critchin, I think the aesthetic will translate well to the botanical subjects I will be photographing. I feel aesthetics are important. In the words of René Magritte, we see the world as being outside ourselves, even though it is a mental representation of what we experience. What lies behind the window pane of our understanding requires a design before we can comprehend its form, and it is culture, convention and cognition that makes that design. The aesthetic we apply shows the world who we are and where we come from.